Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Fitness Show. I'm your host, Nino Gonzalez, joined in person by two guests today. Pei Chen, who's on my left side. So you'll notice if I'm turning to my left, I'm talking to Pei. And on my right side is our special guest, Dr. Teresa Yeh. That's going to be very weird for me to say. I call you Yeh, but welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
So tell us a little bit about you. You're a clinical psychologist, but I want to know kind of your background in psychology, what you're interested in, what you're currently doing right now. Then we'll kind of pick your brain a little bit.
Okay. So I went to Pepperdine University and I got my doctorate in psychology. It's called a PsyD. A lot of people think of it as a PhD. It's pretty much the same. So I got my PsyD from Pepperdine in 2019. And then I went on to do an internship in the BOP, or what we call Bureau of Prisons. And then I also went to the VA. So I worked with veterans for a postdoctoral fellowship. And then now I'm back in the Bureau of Prisons. Some of my interests are trauma-related disorders, substance use. I did a lot of training in substance use disorders. And currently, I'm running a trauma-based program for female incarcerated individuals.
Crazy. Yeah, you have a unique background. You and my wife, obviously, Dr. Castillo. It's just interesting where you guys both come from, but you also have a good insight into just general psychology and kind of what we want to bring you on is because we talk a lot about goal setting. We talk a lot about psychology, just a very, very different things. And we thought your insight into, because you and I have had really good conversations about money and kind of our own personal relationships with money. So let's start from youth. I'm really curious. What do you think is some of the biggest predictors of people's relationships with money from their youth?
I definitely think it stems from a lot of how you were raised from your parents. I think for a lot of things, and not just money, right? With behaviors, with thought processes, with the way we perceive the world, ourselves, and others, it really stems from how we grew up. I come from like more of a what we call like a psychodynamic theoretical orientation, and it's from Sigmund Freud, and we look at the different developmental stages that people grow up in and what has occurred in each developmental stage. And so that, I think, plays a huge role in how we view money. So like, for example, for me, like when I was growing up, my parents use money as like a form of love, right? So like they use monetary based gifts. That was their way of demonstrating what love was. And especially me being Asian, we're not very words of affirmation. We're not very, like hugs or stuff like that. We were very much give, give, give. This is my form of love. So that's kind of played into how I view money as an adult.
And do you think so you mentioned the different developmental stages. At what, I know that just general youth is important, but at what stage do you think is the most impactful where if you associate these behaviors between the ages of, let's say, 5 and 10, that's going to be like the biggest predictor when they're in their young 20s, their 30s of how their relationship is with money? Do you think there's a specific age group?
I definitely think each stage, especially from 0 to probably around your like preteen to teenage years, are very vital. But I don't think there's a specific 0 to 2, 2 to 4. I don't think it's that. I think it's whatever occurs that is most significant within those stages. And you actually see that a lot with trauma patients. Like trauma patients have complex trauma or individual trauma events in very different stages of their youth, even in their adulthood. But from where I've, taught or like conceptualized theoretically, it's usually occurring in the childhood era.
And what do you think? I mean, just coming from, because I know we've talked about, like, you and I have different backgrounds. My parents were money was okay, we have to be careful, right? We only have so much. It was that scarcity mindset that we've talked about. How about you? Like, what have you seen kind of with your childhood and how your current association with money?
I think, well, first of all, I want to say that I love that we have badass like guests. Who else can get to interview someone who works with inmates, right? Like, and on top of that, being beautiful at the same time, right?
Oh, thank you.
Pat ourselves on that. And if I'm not allowed to say that word, they can edit it. But honestly, I feel like, we have a connection because we're both from the Asian background. And I totally concur with what you said, which is very much that cultural part is so important. in the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and maybe because he's also Asian, his dad was my dad. Exactly. The poor dad, not that I'm saying my dad's poor. Sorry, dad. But I'm just saying that mindset mentality was very much go and, study hard, go get a job, and then work, diligently and never complain to your boss. Right. And this generation is so different where, we are taught to advocate and to complain, right? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. You're not going to get a promotion if you just start your job and never complain and never do anything and then just kind of follow the rule and never change your job. Like the biggest income boost is when you switch jobs, right? It's not when you get good job reviews. That's going to get you maybe like
a percent increase in pay.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like when you switch, and I experienced that myself, when I just got out of college, I got my first job and I did good, like always got good reviews, but I never got a big promotion or a big paycheck, like increase after review. And then when I switch jobs, then that's where I get like 18% bumps. But I'm not doing anything harder or more. I'm still working the same hours. I'm still the same work ethic. I haven't changed. Well, what changed is that learning how to kind of market yourself constantly. And I see that a huge difference between our, and I don't want to use stereotypes, but here we go. Like the typical Asian worker, out there is just you're a hard worker. You're willing to put in the hours. You're willing to do it for less pay. And then you're not going to complain. Right. And that's kind of changing now, which is exciting.
Well, because I think it has a lot to do with social media and the access that people have to information. Well, like this show, right? Anybody can listen to the show and learn from different angles, different topics. But something I wanted to bring up, because you and I have talked about the entrepreneurial niche that people have, right? That it's like one of those things that if you have a hustler mindset, we talked about this yesterday at lunch, it was you have that mindset of what you're kind of born with, right? Sometimes we think that there's something that you're kind of born with, and that if someone can give you hope and develop that little seed, you can become even more successful. So that's where I wanted to turn it to you is do you think that there is a nature component in addition to the nurture component? Because like we talked about yesterday, for me, there was always that bug that I wanted more. I wanted to make more money just because. And some people call it hustler mindset, entrepreneurial. But do you think that there is a genetic component involved in how we're brought up or how we're born, our genetics, but then also how we're raised kind of turns on or turns off that switch?
Nature versus nurture has always been such a huge debate, amongst different researchers, psychologists. I mean, there's hundreds of articles written on nurture or nature, right? And I always say this with everything in psychology, everything is on a continuum. If you look at life, nothing is black and white. Everything is very much on a continuum. You could take finances, physical fitness, all of that is on a continuum. And so to answer your question, I think it's a mixture of both, right? It's in the middle. There has to be a genetic component and there has to be something of a family makeup, how you were raised, in order to get that entrepreneur niche. I know for myself, I do not have the entrepreneur niche. I don't know where to start to run a business. I don't know any of that. But guess what? My parents are huge business owners and I was raised in that. And so you would think my nurture is there, but I probably don't have the nature, so I don't have the genetic component to just go and do it.
It could also be the opposite because you saw what your parents went through and that turned you off completely. See, and it sounds like you as well, where I was raised in a setting where I saw my parents just work in the traditional sense that I had to then see there's got to be another way. It was that search for the alternative that led me to the path that I'm on. If I had seen, like in your situation, it's kind of the inverse, where your parents were business oriented, that almost, you then saw the negatives with it and you wanted to turn away from that and say, you know what, I don't necessarily need that money or that lifestyle. This seems more peaceful over here. So maybe it's the inverse of that. It's like, okay, well, whatever your parents are doing, not that you're going to be the complete opposite, but you get to see the downfalls. Your parents work like crazy, the late nights, the getting up early. You were talking before we came on air, when you go to work and you get done, that laptop closes, you cannot take your work home as a government employee. We never stop. And this is something we've taught, like who's genuinely happier, right? That's the thing is, people get into the entrepreneurial world to make more money. thinking it's going to make them happier. But sometimes, I don't know about you, but I long for the days where I can just turn my laptop and nobody can bother me.
Right. And shut
You
down.
have too many days of not doing anything. That's when you go like, oh gosh.
But you have that. I don't think you do.
No,
Right? Like you're okay with sitting down for a
oh
week
my
and just binge
gosh.
watching TV.
And I think that's the beauty of humans, people, right? We're so different. Like I crave what my best friend was saying, like rotting on the couch, right? I crave that. I literally crave that. I was literally just complaining about how I only had 1 hour to rot this week, you know? And for me, it's like I could be on the couch for 8 hours a day and be completely fine. But for you, it's probably,
oh no.
right.
Yeah.
But then I think how me and you may be similar is I cannot do that for a lifetime. Like give me a week, I'm good. But after that, I need to be doing something. I need to be walking. I need to be running. I don't know. I need to be up on my feet doing something.
So you're like a sprinter.
Yes, absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
We're what, long distance runners and sprinters?
We are marathoners.
That's true.
Yeah. That's just different way of, you still have to run the same distance, right? In your life is everybody still have, no matter what, that distance, you still have to run it. It be 80 years, whatever the distance that you're blessed with, right? But it's just, how do you want to approach that distance? Do you want to sprint and then rest, sprint and then rest? Or do you want to just meander along and kind of jog and take a look at whatever is going on and take your time?
Or do you want to do what we do and just sprint for the rest of our lives?
Right.
I was going to say, you guys both
and some people
sprint.
just don't. Some people are just like Usain Bolt. They just don't stop.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about when you were talking about the sprinting and the jogging. Yeah, I'm definitely a sprinter because I even look at the career that I'm in. I am required to retire at 57. That is very early. And so what am I going to do for the rest of my life?
Do they give you a handbook, employee guide to?
No, they
Guide to
don't.
retirement?
Yeah, they don't. I mean, I've always told myself I'm going to get a second career. That's literally everything that I've said. I was like, I'm going to get a job at the VA. I'm going to have a private practice. I cannot just, 57 to me is very young. But because I like rotting, I don't know anymore.
But see, I think that's a very good point because we talk a lot about retirement and people want to make money because they want to retire. But then they get to retirement, be it an early retirement, and they don't know what to do with their time. You're very aware that, you know, when you get to that age, you realize I need to prepare for that because I can't just sit around and do nothing. And it goes back to the concept of retirement. What are you making money for? What's your big goal? Like what's your goal to make money? If your goal to make money is because you really, really hate your job, well, then that's different. You have a different incentive, a different motive of where you're going to go. But if you're going to get to like a place where you are and you can't just sit around, whereas she's like the typical employee that would really like their job and then leave it and then end up going back to work because you find your identity with it.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's and this is why I wanted to have you on, is because it's so important that people are aware of that early on, because everybody thinks money will solve their problems. People think that, okay, if I make this amount of money, I can quit my job and I'll be happy. Like you said, you can't rot like that for the rest of your life. You need some sort of stimulation.
Right. And that goes back to like, what drives life, right? I've always said like what drives life is like our perception of what purpose and meaning is for us. We need to have a sense of purpose. If we do not have a sense of purpose, what is life? You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't know what that purpose of your life is or the meaning of your life, like there's really no point of having that money.
How do you find the purpose?
I think for at least for me and for a lot of the people that I work with in therapy is really having them identify what are their strengths and what makes them happy and like what makes them thrive, right? And everybody's definition of happiness is very different. I literally just said this last week in group. Somebody's version of happiness is a honey bun, right? Honey bun is like a kind of like a form of currency,
Okay.
right? So like for them, if they have 10 honey buns, they're really, really happy. But for some other person, they're going to be like, I don't need honey buns. I need a job. I need self-care. I need all of these things. I need to exercise. And so it just really depends on what somebody's definition of happiness is. So like, we really want to play on their strengths and what defines happiness in order for them to come to the conclusion of like, what is their purpose?
How do you do that? How do you find that while simultaneously living the current life you have? because I've mentioned this to Pei a lot of times. I wasn't able to ask those questions until I kind of closed that first chapter of my life, stepped away as a dietitian. And then I was thinking, well, what am I going to do now? I'm an investor, but I don't really need to spend all this time doing it. So who am I and what do I want to do? Then I had the time, because I had the money part taken care of, to start asking myself those deeper questions. That it's either A, you get to a point in your life where you meet your first definition of success, or B, you go to therapy.
Or something happens.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Something unexpectedly happened that kind of push you off your normal course.
Right.
And that type of event typically gets people, thinking.
Right. On their toes, moving.
Right.
Yeah.
So that goes back to, like we've always talked about, setting goals. And one of the goals is finding a purpose and identifying your purpose. So we talked about a little bit about behaviors in our youth. And obviously where we are now is where we are now. We can't go back. We can't go back and change that, but we can learn from it. So I know people have, I specifically have this uncomfortability when I'm asking myself, like, well, what makes me happy? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. So how can people simultaneously assess their childhood and then ask themselves questions? And what are things people can do now to learn from their childhood and understand their baseline to then make improvements in their lives, be it from a physical fitness point of view, be it from a money point of view? How can people kind of get started now, wherever they are at their life?
I never think there's no start end date for anything. I think it's all about, the thing about psychology is like, it's all about the way you view it, right? You can take two people with the same exact childhood, but if both of them perceive their childhood in two different ways, both people are going to go in opposite directions, right? Same thing with, but of course, it's not just the perception. You have to look at resources. You have to look at their opportunities. There's a lot that goes into it, but it really is about how you take your experience and you run with it.
Okay.
So like, let's take, and I'm probably going to be mentioning trauma a lot because that's
Sure.
probably where my brain goes. But let's take two people who were sexually assaulted at the age of 5, right? If one individual who was a survivor goes, this is my life, I am making this experience my entire life, that trajectory is going to look very different than somebody that says, yeah, that happened, but I'm going to move on, right? I'm going to ask myself, why did this happen and what is it for? Is it going to make me a stronger person? Am I going to use this as just like, you know what, this is an excuse for everything, right? And so those two people will have two very different trajectories. So I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but it really is how you take your experiences from childhood and how you're going to use it to motivate yourself and to move forward or not. If you don't use it and motivate yourself, you're not going to move forward.
You know, a principle that reminds me of rethink your thinking. If I see my childhood as I was poor, I didn't have money, that can either A, put me in the victim card, or B, motivate the living hell out of me. And I think for people like Pei and I, that was an incentive. See that, and this is where I go back to kind of the differences of how people are brought up. Being brought up in a business parents that are being able to make money, maybe that de-incentivizes it more, versus for us, being that we had less, it allows it motive, because there's no other option. It's like, I don't want to taste that again. I don't ever want to have the thought of, okay, I can't afford rent, I can't afford food. And that drives you and that motivates you. However, and this is the question where I wanted to go next, how do you shift perspective depending on the place you're at in your life? So let's say the reflection of your childhood was victim, to then you use that as resilience. But then that resilience, you never are able to stop. I mentioned this quote on the podcast before, that the world is divided into two types of people: those who don't know how to make money and those who don't know how to stop. If we go down this road, and you remind me of this in terms of the resilience, you have this chip on your shoulder wanting to prove everybody. How do you know when enough is enough? And now it's time to pivot. Like you've burned that candle for what you needed. You can't keep doing that for 80 years of your life, because you're potentially are never going to be able to enjoy it. So then how can you take a negative experience, turn it into a positive one, but then it becomes negative again? How do you rework those perceptions if it's all how we view it?
Our perceptions are ever changing. We can change our perceptions all the time. But when you were talking, all I can think about was going back to the continuum, right? The balance. So it sounds like to me, when you're turning something negative into positive, and then it becomes too positive, then it also starts to shift into the negative realm. That to me is that you're off balance, right? You have to start introducing more balance into kind of like tipping the scales a little bit more even, so that you can go back to like, you know what, this is a positive thing, but I've also seen some negative sides of it, but it's okay. So that's kind of where I kept going back when you were speaking. It's like, we really need to have balance in our life.
Right. Well, what makes you successful isn't going to be the thing that takes you to the next level.
Right.
And that's kind of we've shared that we're at and we've experienced is that the fire in our bellies that got us to where we're at today, we're grateful for, obviously. But at the same time, that can burn you out if you're not careful. And it's almost, okay, well, how do I turn this thought process into something that now I can turn it into positive? How do I basically have the millionaire mindset, but towards my life, towards my well-being, towards my health, towards just general balance in life, as you mentioned? And I think that's a struggle. That's a struggle that I think that's why I think it's so important that people do kind of the inverse of what I did, which is find out your why before you find the steps. I did, or I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to make money, then eventually money will solve the problems, but it never did.
But I think the balance part, that's where the purpose piece comes in, right? Because for people like you, you tend to, I don't know if it's true, but I'm just going to say, from my observation, it's like you are either 0 or you're 100. There's
That's
no
true.
in between, right? And so having that purpose when you're at the extreme ends of both, it's either going to, when you're at 0, that purpose is going to motivate you to get, from the rotting position right up. And then when you're at that extreme end of 100, that purpose is going to bring you back and say like, no, that I'm off my purpose now. I'm now doing it for another purpose a hidden purpose that maybe I didn't know about, right? Maybe it's just like, hey, my ego is getting bigger. I feel like more important now. And then you can kind of scale back and say like, no, that was not my original purpose. My original purpose was, just pick a topic, right? Was to help more people get healthier. Right now I'm more about, oh yeah, I want to help more people get, 1,000 followers on their Instagram, right? Then you're just off balance. Like, you're saying.
Right. So, okay. So enough about the therapy session here that's going on.
We all have a little bit of that, right?
I know.
That is hilarious. Well, it's because like you literally just talked about like when you became a dietitian, right? You were like, I'm done with that. You're like, you did that, you hit your goal, and now you have completely transformed your goal into like something completely different. And that goes back to what Pay's talking about, is that your purpose changed throughout the years. Your primary purpose in the beginning was just getting your master's, right? Then you got that job and stuff like, so I agree with you. Our purpose changes all the time. Our definition of happiness changes all the time.
Well, I think helps with that is mindfulness. And I know that you kind of have a good inkling of how to teach mindfulness, how to help with mindfulness. I do want to pivot into that because I've noticed that with everyone, when things are kind of crazy, and this is both going to be a financial tip, but also a health tip. Mindfulness can mean multiple things. So I want you to kind of just, what does mindfulness mean to you?
So mindfulness comes from like Buddhist teachings, and they developed it as like a therapeutic skill to help with like distress tolerance, emotion regulation, anxiety related things. And it really reminds or like forces people to remain in the present. And because this is how I usually teach the clients that I work with, because if your thoughts are too much in the future, it's going to create anxiety, right? If your thoughts are always about the past, it's going to create depression or sadness. Mindfulness teaches you to like remain still, remain in the present, observe what is going on around you. And in this present moment, what are you experiencing? And for a lot of people, it's like, I'm not sad, I'm not anxious, I'm just here. And so there's a lot of different types of mindfulness. There's progressive muscle relaxation, there's deep breathing exercises, there's guided meditation, there's tons of different types of mindfulness that allows people to really like put themselves in the present and get rid of those racing thoughts that they're having.
And sometimes I think those, again, I go back to the thing that builds people up can also tear them down. If you have a racing mind, typically that allows you to be super productive, right? I think a lot of our listeners are motivated, that are on here. They're motivated. They want to become a better version of themselves, no matter where they're starting. But having mindfulness, something that like is synonymous with that, is grounding for me. It reminds me, okay, where am I at right now? And if I'm in the midst of the chaos, if I'm working, I'm trying to make more money because I know I want to quit my job. So then I pick up a second job, but I'm just going. Having the time to just take a 5-10 minute break in between my shifts, let's say, allows me and people to then, okay, almost remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing. But mindfulness is very hard because it's destimulating, and we live in a consistently stimulating world, right? So you mentioned progressive muscle relaxation, you mentioned guided meditations. Are those kind of your top recommended ones for people? Like, people are listening, like, okay, well, I hear it all the time. People always say, be mindful, be mindful. What is that? Like, how do I start? What do I do? Like, okay, I say I'm going to take 10 minutes right now to be mindful. What are some things they can do?
So they can definitely start with mindful eating. That's probably one of my favorite exercises to teach. It's easy, it's fun. I love food. And so I always tell them to start off with like a Hershey Kisses, right? It's easy, right? Small. And so you're slowly going through the process of peeling off the layer of the Hershey's, you're observing it, you're describing it to yourself. The foil is silver, it feels this way. You're going to use all your senses to describe what's going on in the process. As you're putting the Hershey, the chocolate in your mouth, you're also thinking about all your senses as well. What do I see? What do I feel? What do I taste? What do I hear? And then every single step of the process, even down to like, swallowing and all of that stuff, you're doing it in a very slow, mindful manner because it really slows down your thought process. You're only thinking about what's going on with the Hershey Kisses. Absolutely. You're not thinking about anything else. And I guarantee you're going to find things about that experience that you've never thought of before. And it really kind of reminds individuals when they do this that like our thoughts are just our thoughts. Our thoughts are so debilitating at times for those that have like generalized anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, because they're all in our mind, right? But we forget that thoughts are just thoughts.
How many habits do people do without even thinking about it?
Oh my gosh.
And not only that, but that also ties it specifically in the fitness world. You could, like you mentioned, mindful eating. I mean, how many habits do people do when it comes to food that they don't even think about? The reasons why they eat, how they eat, putting TV on, the behaviors behind eating. I think that's the one place to start. But also when it comes to how people spend their money, people's paycheck comes in. They don't think about what grocery store they're going to go shop at. They don't think about what bills they're going to go pay. They don't think, for example, they go on Amazon to go buy something. They're not thinking, okay, why am I buying this? They just think, oh, I needed this. Okay, I'm going to order it. And that can cause both poor and positive food choices, but also money choices. And one of your recommendations always with people is to form a budget, right? But I think taking that step further is, okay, well, forming a budget, why do those people make the decisions to buy the things that they buy? That is a form of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Being
Absolutely.
able to do that. I think mindful eating is a solid place to start. It is a challenge because you're taking your thought, everything's kind of away and you're having to focus on this thing. But when you're doing it and you really allow yourself to do it, you realize, I didn't even know that the Hershey's was silver.
Mm-hmm.
As you were describing, I'm like, yeah, that's right. But that shows that because you're so focused, and that's an enhanced focus.
Yeah.
And that, talk to me about how mindfulness correctly done could lead to a boost in productivity.
Oh, absolutely. Because you're not anxious as much and you know how to compartmentalize, right? For those that don't know how to control their thoughts yet, that have anxiety or depression or even like psychotic related thoughts and things like that, like they don't know how to compartmentalize those thoughts, which then leads to a decrease in productivity, right? But when we learn mindfulness, a core skill that I would say in psychology, they're able to slow their thoughts down, practice it when they're feeling anxious or sad or worried, whatever emotion that's uncomfortable, and then take that break, that 5 to 10 minutes, implement that exercise and then carry on, and their productivity is going to go up. It's just like a domino effect.
Yeah. Well, and that productivity could allow a person to both make more money because they're able to compartmentalize and not be so squirrel brain where it's like starting a task, ping, I get a notification, let me go here. So I think it allows people to be more organized, therefore make more money. But same thing with mindful eating is so important when it comes to general health. But when you do that, you're able to then balance your calories out and meet your goal, in my opinion, faster.
Absolutely.
if you're practicing these behaviors. So I think I like it. I mean, what about you? What are your thoughts with mindfulness?
So what are your thoughts on the saying, you are what you think about? I think it was Earl Nightingale who said that. I'm not sure. Don't quote me, but what do you think that? Like you become what you think about.
Yes, I definitely. So that reminds me, and I don't know if I would have to like look up the quote, but there's this like quote, and it basically starts off with like your thoughts, right? And then your thoughts lead to your behaviors. So basically it's saying that you become your thoughts. And I do believe that to an extent, right? Like everything, there's a balance. If you allow your thoughts to dictate what your life should be and your behaviors, absolutely, you're going to live out those thoughts. There's a type of theory called cognitive behavioral therapy, and they have the cognitive triad, and they talk about the thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors, right? So like thoughts lead to feelings, which lead to behaviors, and they want to interject into changing your thoughts or your behaviors or your feelings. But when we start changing our thoughts, we start leading it to more productive behaviors or pro-social behaviors or things like that. We have this model, it's called the ABC model, right? It's called the antecedent leads to behaviors, leads to consequences. So antecedent is like a triggering event. So let's say I'm going to talk about a situation in prison, right? Let's say like they got a smaller piece of chicken, yes. Right?
Faye's like, tell me the murder story.
This has food, so it's not that interesting, but I always like to use this example because it's funny. But so on Thursdays, they get chicken Thursdays, right? It's like for a lot of the women, that's like their favorite meal of the week. So, and there's chicken thighs. So, some people get smaller chicken thighs, other bigger chicken. So I always tell them the antecedent is that you got the smallest chicken thigh out of everybody in that chow hall, right? Or the dining hall. And then it leads to their behaviors of acting out, right? The inmate is cussing out, the staff saying, you gave me a smaller piece of chicken. And what are the consequences? You might go to SHU, which is special housing unit. You might accrue an incident report, which may, make you stay longer in prison. You lose your good time, things like that. So how are we going to change that, right? We can't change the antecedent event. We can't change that, but we need to change our thoughts, which lead to that the B part, right? We need to look at it as like, you know what? I did get a smaller chicken today, and maybe they ran out of all of the bigger chickens. So my behaviors now are going to be like, I'm cool, I'm chilling, I'm going to leave, right? Then the consequences, you don't have any negative consequences. So I absolutely do believe all that to say is that our thoughts definitely can become who we are if we don't have control of our thoughts.
I mean, we see that in our community all the time. I was just thinking about that. I'm like, that sounds like our WhatsApp chat.
Yeah.
Not prison, but I mean, think about it.
Not prison.
Investment goes south, doesn't perform. You get to see how a person responds.
Yeah.
The behavior, the B part right there. That behavior should lead to consequences that then you can implement. I'm not going to make that same mistake again. Just like you can't control the initial input, but you can control how you respond. If I put money here and I lost money here, okay, that was the consequence. I lost money. Well, now I'm not from that consequence. I'm going to rethink my thinking. Like it's basically putting Nelson Nash meets psychology, becoming your own banker very easily. But I'm going to change my consequence and therefore not put myself in that risky situation again. Or if I do, then the next time I can change my behavior and thus my consequence will be a little bit different. It's very interesting.
I actually think a lot of when you were saying the concept of rethinking, what was it?
Rethink your thinking.
Rethink your thinking. I see so much cross section between what you guys are learning and talking about, especially in this podcast, to psychology. Like we have the same concept, reframing your thoughts, like positive reframe. Like it is very similar.
Yeah. And that's exactly what part of the reason why I wanted to have you on is because of we're referring to Becoming Your Own Banker. It's an infinite banking concept book. It's a life insurance policy that's kind of the foundation to our investing. But he has like 4 core principles. And one of those principles is rethink your thinking. And it goes more towards the getting society to question, okay, well, is the
conventional thinking. Yeah.
Based on that thought. But then if you can take it a step lower and think about, okay, well, why do I have the thoughts that I have? Not only am I going to rethink my thinking, but understanding why do I think what I think? Because if I can understand why I think this, then I have a more open mind to different opportunities, different thoughts, that then I can use that to change my thoughts. And as downstream effect of that change my behavior and thus change my consequences in a positive way. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with the thoughts was in both fitness and finance. There's so much noise out there, so many opinions, so many do this, not that, don't do this, don't do that. How can people have a clear mind to take in the noise? Because ultimately someone says, I want to go make more money or I want to lose weight. They go on YouTube, they go on Google, think about all the things that they're going to come across. How can people filter using the mindfulness, using these principles? How can people then use that to the information that's being spewed out to them on a daily basis?
When you were talking about that, I was thinking about, when I go on TikTok, YouTube, all those social media platforms, and I look at how to gain muscle, how to lose weight, you come across 100 type of recommendations on how to do it. And so I think to begin with that is that you really need to know yourself and you need to know what works with yourself. Because if you're listening to every single person out there, you're going to have squirrel brain. You're going to be like going in different directions all the time and like get so frustrated and just go, you know what? I don't want to do it anymore. Right. And so you really need to know yourself in order to reach those goals. You have to know what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what is something that will help you progress, and what is something that may actually help you decrease your productivity, right? And so knowing yourself first is probably first and foremost. And you can do that by mindfulness, right? Observing yourself, being in tune with your breathing and stuff like that. One thing about mindfulness is that what I've heard from a lot of people is when they start doing it, it's frustrating because all of your thoughts are pouring in and you can't focus, right? But I always remind them, like everything in life, it takes practice. The first 10 times, 20 times, you're only going to be able to sit still for maybe 5 minutes, and that's okay. But you just keep going at it. It's just like everything in life.
Yeah. I can't help but to think about different personality types based on what you're saying, because something that we've talked about, there's no cookie cutter diet that's going to work. That's why when anyone says you need to follow this diet, that's a red flag, because it might work for them and it might work for a subset of the population, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And I love talking about the triad of what I call the health, wealth, and then the psychological piece, because that underlines everything. And the sooner you can understand yourself, the better you can make the decisions to, again, improve yourself, because you're going after a specific goal, a specific outcome. And that kind of leads me to personalities, different personalities. We had, I forgot how to say the word, Jeff King, Enneagram. We had him on talking about the Enneagram.
Oh,
blows my mind. Anyways, it was just talking about the different different traits. It's a really interesting concept, and talking about if you're like a motivator, a leader, a linker, just different personality types. And I couldn't help but to think, is that not the most important thing first, is to understand your personality type?
absolutely.
Because then you can gauge your investment risk. Something we talk about with investment a lot is risk. How much are you able to lose and or willing to lose if something were to happen, versus how conservative are you? Do you just want to play it safe, right? My question with that is, what are the more dominant personality types that just in general society that are out there? Or is it just the submissive? You have the submissive person, you have the CEO leader, people tend to think is the aggressive one,
alpha
male.
Yeah.
You hear the alpha, the sigma, different types. What are the major personality types that people can maybe not put themselves in a bucket, but I just want to identify those so that we can have general guidance of how people can, that are in those boxes, then make improvements on each of those?
So that's a very difficult question for me to answer, because I think what society looks at personalities is very different how psychologists look at personalities. So we actually have different personality disorders, not necessarily types.
Okay.
When I think about types, I look at more of the common society type of terminologies, like the alpha, things like that. And so when we as a psychologist look at personalities, we look at personality disorders, and that's the narcissistic personality disorder, the borderline personality disorder, dependent personality disorder. And so it's hard to answer that question.
I get what you're saying. It's almost
don't we all have a little bit of disorder?
Yeah. But like, I think what you might be asking is more of like, have you guys taken the Myers-Briggs?
Ooh,
Like where it talks about the introvert, the extrovert, and it comes up with like career
yeah. Okay,
opportunities
I've
or
heard
like,
that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, that's actually a really cool personality test that I think what people would benefit more from in identifying like what are some of their areas of growth, which is also like people call it weaknesses. I like to call it areas of growth because it's much more like strength based.
Yeah, sure.
And also what their strengths are and like what kind of career fields they may like thrive in.
Okay.
And so it's free. You can just like search Myers-Briggs on Google and it's like, I haven't taken it in a while, but it's like maybe 200 something questions and it produces out like this like 4 code type. And it talks about like introvert, extrovert, what is it? I can't even remember the last 3, but because it's been a while, but it gives really great information. And what is really cool about this personality test is that you can take it at different points of your
that was
life
gonna be my
and
question.
it's different.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. And as like for someone like me or for someone who maybe goes through their first phase and they had a personality type during that phase, but then they exit that phase and then now they take those 200 questions again and maybe their answer different, then they have a new, more different traits, different characteristics that
new
then
purpose.
right. But I think understanding your traits then allows you to understand your purpose. If it's okay, well, I like public speaking, or I want to be more behind the scenes. I don't really want to deal with people too much. Then maybe you can then start looking at. I know that we were talking about. You can almost Google Myers-Briggs personality jobs, and then they give you like, here are the jobs, here are some opportunities. And I think that's a good option first and foremost to see if you belong where you're at, right? Because oftentimes, you've talked to me about kind of when you were brought up, it was doctor, lawyer, like the traditional jobs to go after. But what if you find out 4 or 5 years into your career, I actually don't want to do this? And the catalyst to that was taking one of these tests. And that's where, because oftentimes people think, okay, well, I need to know myself. Well, what does that even mean? Well, you can actually categorize it based on some of these personality tests like the Myers-Briggs to get an idea, okay, here's what I am and here's what people like me have similar characteristics. I don't know if I took that specific one, but I remember taking one and thinking, hey, that's me. Hey, that's me. Like, and that's the whole point of it. And you realize the strengths and the areas of improvement. And then from there, you can analyze that and then hopefully improve upon that, which brings me to the question of, I have my opinion on this. Do you think everybody can benefit from therapy?
Yes. That's like, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes. I was literally, what I was thinking when you guys were talking is that everybody that is on their financial goal or journey or fitness journey or financial fitness journey should be in therapy as well. So absolutely. I mean, it really helps you discover like who you are, right? If you're starting with a blank slate and you're like, I don't have nowhere to begin, like start with therapy because then it helps you solidify like what your needs are, what your purpose, what the meaning of life is, what happiness is for you and things like that.
And I think as a society, this kind of reminds me of how we treat our children, because what do we do as adults when we meet, the older kids? You ask them, what do you want to do? Who do and the expectant answer is, I want to be a doctor or I want to be an engineer. And we never pursue that further with them and ask them, what about this particular profession attracts you to it or makes you want to do this, right? So we are kind of like, as a society, adults at fault by perpetuating this behavior on our kids, right? It's almost like we got to reverse that thought, not ask what they want to do in life as a profession, but kind of help them find out if they are like an introvert, what category do you fall into? And then go from there and say, hey, I noticed that you like to talk a lot, or I noticed that you really like to perform. Have you thought about these type of work that you can pursue that aligns with your personality and your interests? And, of course, I cannot go back in time. So I already, my daughter's already 16. So I'm too late. I'm just giving advice for people who have younger kids. Stop asking what they want to become when they grow up instead, right?
But you learn by experience.
Right. Yeah.
I think part of that's cultural, because remember I mentioned kind of Europe and Asia, how when they ask, what do you do? It's more asking, what do you enjoy doing? As opposed to what do you do for a living? Because in America, we're so tied into our identity is through our work. And when someone asks, what do? You say, I'm a dietitian, I'm a teacher, I'm a psychologist. Like, this is who I am. But in reality, that's not only who you are. You are not just your profession. You are more than that. And I think when you have money, that allows you to then ask, who are you beyond that? One of the things Paige shared on one of our shows before was she was a teacher. And when she stopped being a teacher, right, it was difficult to tell her teacher friends or her friends what she did because people didn't understand.
I quit going out because I'm scared.
Right. Like, how do you have that conversation with, and then that goes to the second point of, well, she's clearly successful. That then causes people to internalize their current lifestyle is not what they want it to be. Oh, look, it must be nice, Pay. Must be nice that you're living this lifestyle. Well, I can't do that. I have to feed X, Y, and Z. You must have had it nice. But that's a reflection of them as opposed to a reflection of you. And that's where I think you can't tell somebody to go to therapy without you going to therapy, right? Like, if someone's coming to you and critiquing you, the more resilience you can build in yourself. You can say, I'm not going to be mad at you because that's how you feel about yourself. I'm going to go and address that myself and kind of fix it. I fully agree. I mean, breaking news, psychologist recommends to go to therapy, but I fully agree with it because I think no matter what you're doing in life, you're trending towards one way or another. You're going in a direction, whether it's a direction you want to be going in or not. Specifically in the fitness and the finance world, if you can understand yourself better, you are going to be the biggest barrier to achieving your goals. Nobody else, right? Nobody else will get in your way more than you're going to get in your own way. So the more you can clear that up, identify yourself, the more you can get out of your own way and allow yourself to propel that. And who knows, maybe you're even, something that I've learned from you is that, like, you value that balance with work of being able to close that laptop. Like, that's a good thing. And you kind of going to, like, someone like her going to make all this money, which she probably just end up back doing what she's doing. And that's so crucial for people to understand that maybe you're already doing what you're supposed to be doing, but maybe you just need to pivot a little bit. Maybe you need to do a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that, but not have to break the whole barrier down and go down another rat race of trying to make millions and millions of dollars. That's never going to affect your life at all.
That was very deep. Yeah, I'm like silenced. And I'm like, I don't even know.
It's uncomfortable.
What to say.
It's uncomfortable for people. I think, and I want to ask you this question because we've had, and I was just going to kind of throw you off, but one of the books that I read, 4,000 Weeks, asked the question, if you were given $1 million right now, how would you spend it? Not on, you can't invest it, you can't save it, and you can't donate it. How would you spend that money?
So I can't save it.
Can't invest it.
I can't invest it and I can't donate it. I have to spend it. I would probably buy another few houses.
What are you doing with the houses?
Well, once the period that I can't invest, can I sell the houses in 10 years?
She's so analytical.
See, right? That's what I'm saying.
Analytical.
Because I was like, you didn't say the duration of how long I can.
Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, I would probably buy a few houses and sit on it, and then sell it whenever the time frame that they think is, and then make more money off of that. Because I can't donate it, because I would have helped my parents pay off like their house and stuff like that, but I can't do that.
Well, you also can't invest, and technically you did that. What you just did is an investment.
Winking, like, yes, and they use the money to help my parents out. But
yeah, well, and the reason why I asked that question is like I answered this and Pei answered this on one of our podcasts. That answer will change as well, depending on where you're at in life. But that to me is a reflection on the personality, right? Because inside you had this burning desire to say, "Ooh, I want to help my parents."
Yeah,
right. Like that was the first thing that came to mind.
Right.
It wasn't to spend it on yourself. And even when it went down to spending it on yourself, you still tried to make it into an investment because you're like, well, I kind of don't need the money right now. Like, let me go ahead and invest it. I think it just shows, because you were on the spot, you didn't have time to think about. People have time to think. They craft this like narrative of how they're going to save the world. But it comes from the premise of money is in your lifetime is a finite thing. Although money is infinite, it's a finite object because you're eventually going to die. You can't take all the money you have with you to the grave. So eventually, in the die with zero principle, you're going to die. Might as well use that money to enjoy your life. And I think that that's where understanding our psychology, understanding first and foremost from the beginning, how do we think? Why do we think the way we think? right? As children. And I think it's so important to have this open conversation with people. Like Pei and I try to advocate this as much as possible. Like it's a taboo. I remember you asked me yesterday, like, do you mind if I ask how much the podcast, like how much,
Because it's taboo.
Yeah, money is such a taboo subject.
It is.
That's why we want to break the barrier, because amongst the two of us, we talk about this a lot, and then we build up a community of people that feel comfortable talking about money, which is super rare.
I love that.
Over the years that I realized that people are so scared to even ask, how much do you make, right?
We never ask. I don't think people ask people that, even though my salary is public information
It's
because we're government workers.
I mean, she works for us. Basically.
Yeah.
Wait, we pay her bill.
You guys pay me. Okay.
I can understand it being uncomfortable with people you work with.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're kind of on the same level almost. And if like that person got a raise and you didn't, I understand that part. But just in general, as a society, not disclosing our income or just talking about money in general makes it more of a taboo, and therefore makes people less comfortable to talk about it.
Yeah, it stigmatizes money.
Right. But
it literally does.
But we also do that from a young age. And that's like, as in our parents, I don't remember my parents ever telling me this is how much I make. Ever. Remember that. I don't ever remember saying I want to be this profession and them telling me, well, that profession, the average salary is this. All I remember them saying is doctors and lawyers make more. Okay, but why? Like, why? What if I don't enjoy it? And so I think understanding, like thinking back to your memories with money as a child, that's like the place to start. Okay, did my parents instill in me that money was scarce, and anytime we had money, we had to value it and treasure it and take care of your things because you might not get a new pair of shoes until the next school year? Understand those beliefs first and foremost. Then see where you're at now and understand your current beliefs with money and why you think the way you think. And then from there, and I think during this side is when you can start dissecting that. And in my opinion, there's no better person or people to dissect it with than a psychologist in therapy, because they will ask you the questions that you will not ask yourself. Like there's just no way to ask those questions of yourself if you don't know. I mean, we've given some questions today, but for the most part, people would need that. And then from there, take that knowledge and that pain that you're going to uncover with therapy, and then go do something with it. Go use that to achieve your goal. I think there's so much to be said about, one, rethinking your thinking, but two, goal setting. And you can't talk about those two without talking about money and talking about psychology. These all go hand in hand because it's who we are. We spend our whole day with ourselves. We spend our lives with ourselves. The more we can understand ourselves better, the better we can enjoy our lives and using the means of fitness and finance. So
I'm dying to ask a question because I can't ask questions, but can I ask one question for y'all? So do you guys notice the difference between those that have worked on themselves in your community versus those that have not worked for themselves? And what is the difference?
It's the more reactive people are the ones that haven't explored.
Yeah.
I did not work, but just even explore that part of themselves. And I think because, our busy our lives are and just noise that we have to kind of block and filter, it's easier to run away from yourself because these questions are not easy questions to ask yourself. And it's easier to just avoid it and not even, A, you don't ask other people about that. And B, that way you don't even have to ask yourself about it.
Avoidance.
I think you're very good about asking people why. We'll have potlucks every month, and our last few potlucks have gotten a little bit more intimate, where we're asking a little bit more personal questions. Because at first it was very tactical. It was very, here's the strategy, here's the investment. And people would tend to just jump on that because they trusted her. Truly. And it's kind of herd mentality. But as we've kind of gone further and further down, you can then start asking those questions. And Pei and I, like our barometer, at least for me, if I ask that question and that our business partner, Dan, you're listening. I remember asking this question. I was like, what are you talking about? Because he's like, his why is so clearly identified for himself. He doesn't even need to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But for others, if I'm asking them like, what's your why, or why do you do this? If it's an uncomfortable question for them and they're not even willing to have the discussion, that shows to me how successful I think they're going to become. And that doesn't mean for the rest of their lives.
Right.
That just means at the current phase that they're at in their lives, maybe they're just not ready for that question. And that's also going to be their limiting factor to how much money they make and how successful per their own standards they will be. And for me personally, I want to surround myself with people who are at least willing to answer the question and say, even if it's a raw answer of, I honestly don't know. And you're the first person that's asked me that question, because I've gotten that answer before. And I think
you've given that answer to me before too.
of course, but you're right. And that's where I can relate to it. Because you're not supposed, if you had the answer, then I would want to know tell me what you're doing, like teach me. But most people don't have the answer. And this goes back to the name of the show. It's finding financial fitness. It's not, we found financial.
Yeah, you're still in the process.
It's a verb. It's an action. It's something that we're still continuing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the important part is the continuing. That's the most important part.
And that's something that I've had to realize as well, is that there isn't an end goal. There isn't an end destination. There isn't okay, you've climbed this mountain, and although you might have climbed that mountain, there's always more mountains to climb. Shall you choose to climb them? Just because the mountains are there doesn't mean you have to climb them. But it's a lifestyle, it's a way of life. And if you decide to not continue to progress and grow in that regards, you're going to grow in another regards. You're always going to fill that time with something. Murphy's Law, you're always going to fill your time with something. So being intentional about how you fill that time allows you to make that time more meaningful. And so, yeah, to answer your question, yes, when people come in and you see those personalities, you see it the most when things are going bad, which fortunately we're around that right now. And you see people's negative personalities, because when things are going good and everyone's winning, well, everyone's winning. But if things are going bad and people are losing their own money, then you start seeing their true colors, and they might say something, but act a certain way behind it. So
it's how they deal with the chaos.
And if they go to therapy,
yeah, they will know how to emotionally regulate
for anything that comes up,
and learn coping skills
for anything that comes up. So anyways, this was a loaded episode.
I think I need therapy after this episode.
I'm like,
I do have one question for you both. This is actually coming from my daughter's applying to college right now. And so, they actually really ask very good questions on the college application. Wow. I'm like, I want to respond to this.
Let me write my own college essay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I missed my chance. But one of the good questions that I thought was like, if you're asked to teach one class or to teach one topic or one thing to the world, what would you teach?
I know my answer.
Go ahead. You go. No, you know your answer. I don't know mine.
Yeah. Empathy. Teaching empathy. Yeah. Teaching people how to legitimately stand in somebody else's shoes. Like actually my therapist years ago asked me, like, what's one quality you really want in a partner? And that immediately was my answer. Because if you don't have empathy and you can't understand other people from their perspective, you will always hit a wall. And you would be surprised on how many people in this world do not have empathy.
Can you learn it?
Oh, I think so. I absolutely think so. I think that's learning from the very basics, is learning what emotions are, right? What actually is anger? What actually is sadness? What actually is jealousy? All of those things. Learning those definitions and painting scenarios and like putting themselves in those scenarios and things like that. I definitely think that people can learn empathy.
Except for me.
Not you per se. Oh my God.
No, but that's really good. I love that answer.
It was interesting, Pei. We lost our guest because she insulted me, and the moment she insulted me,
right, karma, instant karma, it happened.
Oh my God.
Oh, that's good. No, I'll give you my mic here in a bit. I think where I'm at, I would say health. I would teach the importance of developing the best version of yourselves from a health perspective, like how to become physically the best version of yourself, because they're already taking Ye's empathy class. I don't need to teach empathy. I don't really care about empathy.
Can you teach wealth?
Yeah, please. I would love to teach wealth, but I think that I know my specialty and I know what I'm great at, and I'm good at wealth, but I'm great at teaching people about health. And so that would be my class would be like how to be the best and healthiest version of yourself. You?
I think at this point in my life, it's IBC.
Has to be.
Yeah, it has to be. It's called infinite banking concept. And it's just a way, it's not a product, it's not a company, it's a way of interacting with your money where you are learning to be a banker and taking control. So maybe deeper is be how to control your life through money.
And that's what,
we want to harness the power of money. We don't want to be a slave of money. And that I think is a key skill, because I'm not here waking up in the morning doing podcasts or whatever because of money, right? That's different. Like when I feel like I have to do this versus I choose to be here. I choose to be in this moment, right? So
well said. That's so well said. Yeah, I'm going to give you the mic. You want to wrap up with anything you want to say?
Thank you guys so much for letting me be here. This was so fun. Shout out to your wife. I know I know she hates any type of attention, but if it wasn't for Dr. Yesenia Castillo, I wouldn't have known you.
So well said. So well said. Well, thank you for coming on. I anticipate more of these in the future because I value your opinion. I value your judgment, just your insights. And I think that we're already episodes into this. And I think people have started asking questions about themselves that they never thought to ask. But we're not experts. This isn't our field. Like I mentioned, that triad of health, wealth, and mental well-being. We specialize in the top two. We don't specialize in the third, although I have experience, Pei has experience with just our own lives. But having somebody with that expertise is, to me, invaluable. And that's why I think we talked about building a team in previous episodes. I think I mentioned one of those people in your teams has to be somebody with a mental health professional, with just therapy in general. If that's your therapist, fine. Or if you're lucky enough to have friends and significant others who are psychologists, it just makes your life even better. So, Pei, thanks for coming and meeting with us today. Dr. Yeh as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining into this week's episode. Stay tuned for more shows. Take care.